Hello and welcome to Daily Mirror Online. This is On Fire and I'm Iswaran Ratnam. Our guest today is a former foreign minister, a former finance minister, and a very outspoken member of parliament who stood for human rights and a non-confrontational approach on most issues. Mangala Samaraweera, welcome to Daily Mirror Online.
Thank you. It's great to be on fire.
So one of the most unexpected and I guess surprising headline-making stories which came out ahead of the parliamentary elections was your decision not to contest at the election. Why did you take such a big step at this crucial moment?
No, in fact, this is something I have been thinking of ever since the presidential elections were over. In fact, 31 years ago in 1989, when I first entered Parliament, I actually decided to come into politics because of the dreadful human rights situation at the time, especially in the Deep South, where I come from. And when I was invited by Mrs. Sirimawa Bandaranaike to become the organizer of the SLFP for Matara, I finally decided to take up the offer because I felt, I suppose when you're young, we all think that we could change the world, that I could make a difference. And that is why, having entered Parliament in the general election of '89, I, along with Mahinda Rajapaksa, we started the Mothers Front movement at my own house in Walpula Matara, and we were both co-conveners of the movement, and later Richard de Souza's mother, Dr. Manorani Saravamutta, became the chief patron. And that is how I started my political journey, fighting for what I believed in, especially human rights, freedom of expression, freedom of media, and of course, most of all, democracy. But sadly, I felt after 30 odd years, in fact, I celebrated my 30th year in politics last year, in 2019, but I felt that we as a country had not really moved forward because the same issues we were fighting for 30 years ago are still relevant today. We are still talking about preserving human rights. We are still talking about preserving democracy, and in fact I feel that democracy is more at stake than ever before. We are still talking about the freedom of expression, freedom of the media, etc. And I also felt rather restricted. After all these years, I felt the country hasn't moved forward. And in fact, I had not moved forward either in many ways.
But do you think you did enough when you were in power, in office, to actually make a proper change?
Well, we did try to make certain changes, but certainly not enough. And you see, the tragedy of Sri Lanka is that I sincerely believe that from the time we achieved independence, when Sri Lanka was actually perhaps one of the most democratic and developed countries in South Asia. I know that that there was a editorial in the London Times, I was told, on the 4th of February '48, on the day of independence, saying that Ceylon, which is going to be independent from Britain from that day, they predicted the bright future for Sri Lanka, saying it's going to be the Switzerland of the East. That's how they looked at it. And even if you read Lee Kuan Yew's memoirs, he writes how Sri Lanka was considered a model Commonwealth country. At the time of independence, we had some of the two best universities in Asia were here. We had an extremely highly respected, highly regarded bureaucracy. Our police was as good as any police force in the world, etc., etc. Yes, so as I was saying, Sri Lanka was really you know, in the vanguard of nations in South Asia at the time. But today, I mean, let's look back, I mean, and me along with the rest of them also must take part of the blame, part of the guilt. Sri Lanka, the bright young kid in the class who was all sort of expected to do so well, is basically has trailed behind so much. Now we are almost right at the back of the class in this part of the world. So as a result, I have been personally thinking a lot, where did we go wrong? And my personal, of course, it's far too complex to, I think, to say it in a few words, but I feel that even though all our leaders who ruled our country from 48, from D.S. Senanayake to Gotabaya Rajapaksa, they have all come to sit on that chair as the head of government and head of state, certainly with good intentions. I certainly don't believe that any of our leaders came there with the sole intention of killing people, abducting people, stealing from the treasury or stealing from the country or lying to the people. They all come with good intentions. But unfortunately, I feel that some of those who sat on the chair, you know, the crown was, I felt, a little too heavy for them, like the recent experience we had. And some actually goes berserk with all that power. I mean, then they start imagining themselves as kings and then want to start sort of a monarchy in the country. And even the very good leaders, basically, I felt that never had the courage of their convictions to do what was right in the face of all the regressive forces which always basically have tried to stop. I mean, the best example is S.W.R.D. Bandaranaike, whom I feel was a man of impeccable integrity, but he has a lot to answer for, because I feel the 1956 revolution is what unleashed all these retrogressive forces, the genie, so to speak, out of the bottle. And so many years later, we still haven't been able to put that genie back in the bottle. This genie which brings extremism and I would say regression, which has been the normal way of life in '57. Had he signed the Chaganayagam document, you know, history would have been different. But he lost his nerve when a small group of Buddhist priests started to do a satyagraha in front of his house in Rosebud Place. He basically went out, showed the document in order to please them, but at the same time he realized what he was doing, because he's supposed to have said that to the priest, even though I am doing this because of your insistence, the country will feel the repercussions of my deed maybe in 30-40 years' time. And just as he did, you know, this ugly face of separatism raised its head by the 70s, by the 80s. But we have to remember, at the beginning, the Tamils of this country never asked for a separate state. It was only to do with the language. But when we were unable to even accommodate them on that very simple request, quietly, generation to generation, they were pushed towards extremism, and finally, one of the most brutal terrorist organizations in the world was born on our soil. And we all have to be responsible for it. And what is worse is we have not learnt the lessons from that past experiences. In fact, Mahinda Rajapaksa, despite all his flaws, I feel again had the best chance in 2009, once terrorism was defeated finally, when the LTT was finally defeated. Instead of going on an orgy of triumphalism, you know, trying to enact scenes of the Mahavamsa, you know, he actually used that moment to unite that country. actually, if he used that moment to make a new Sri Lankan identity just after the war, he would have he would have been remembered as the greatest of all leaders. But unfortunately, he too fell into the trap of wanting to be a new Dutugamunu, and he started this new journey towards majoritarianism, which Gotabaya Rajapaksa has now taken a step further.
Do you think that the opinions that you had expressed prior to the presidential election when Sajith Premadasa was also going to contest, that these views expressed were not taken well, and that probably cost Sajith Premadasa the election as well?
No, of course, I don't think that is the reason which cost him the election, because the election itself was chaotic and unorganized. I have done many elections before. I have never seen such a chaotic, unorganized election of that nature ever before. And these views were not expressed by me just before that elections. In fact, these are the views I have been expressing ever since I came into politics. Even in fact, in 1994, when Chandrika Kumaratunga was campaigning on 93 for the local government, provincial elections, I'm sorry. You know, in the South, we talked about the genuine grievances of the Tamil people, about having to, if we are to defeat the scourge of LTT terrorism, the need to have a new Sri Lankan identity, need to devolve power. All that was discussed, and we got a huge landslide in the deep South, which is nearly 90% Buddhist. And it was way back in 98, when we were doing the Sudunelu movement. The same lot of extremists came up with this Sinhala Buddhist Commission report. And as the media spokesman for the government, at the time I said that Sinhala Buddhist Commission report should really be confined to the dustbin of history. And I don't know if you remember when hundreds of Buddhist priests came to the Vihara Mahadevi Park to protest against me, and they sort of said that I'll be banned from all the temples of the country. They came all the way to Matara, and they again did a huge protest, but the people of Matara, the Sangha of Matara and elsewhere, were all behind me, because they know that what I'm saying, I mean, those who have bothered to think about this problem, they know what I'm saying is true. It is nothing against Buddhism, but it is again because in this age of patriotism, I consider myself a true patriot. You know, not these ones who use patriotism as a sort of a badge on their sleeve to hide all their other sins. You know, your true patriot is a person who would like to see Sri Lanka achieve the dizzy heights it can achieve. Whereas these forces of regression are the ones, while talking about the Anuradhapura Yuga, the Dutugamunus and the Mahavamsa, we have been basically a country stuck in the past. And that is why I felt finally I need to be more flexible, because of course, as you rightly say, there were especially in the UNP and SJB also many people who felt rather uncomfortable with my views. And I thought to myself, actually, even I'm even more uncomfortable with their views. So this might be the moment where I should leave parliamentary politics and be with like-minded people and fight for the values I believe in. And to do that, I feel that parliament is irrelevant. I can do it much better outside, and in the last months or so, where I have been liberated from the need to do parliamentary politics, I think I've started a more interesting journey than before.
Some are saying that you're looking at probably a role beyond Sri Lanka, maybe at the UN, or maybe something where you can do more on human rights.
I have been invited to do some lectures at Harvard by a very good friend of mine in America and all that, but no, my life is in Sri Lanka. I love Sri Lanka. In fact, as a student, I stayed for 10 years in the UK, and I could have easily have got permanent residency there, but even at that age, I said, no, I want to go back to Sri Lanka. And I don't regret that decision, and especially now. At 64, I certainly am not going anywhere. I will stick it out, and I think Sri Lanka needs the values I believe in more than ever before.
But with the current parliament, do you think there is someone out there who can actually bring the sort of change that you're expecting?
The only person who can perhaps even understand or have a certain conception of the values I'm talking about is Ranil Wickremesinghe. I have a great deal of respect for him, but on the other hand, he's what's the word? He's considered as a person who does not. He's not a populist politician, unfortunately for the country. In fact, I always believe that Ranil Wickremesinghe, I hope I'm wrong, there's still time, will always be remembered as the best president Sri Lanka never had. But beyond that, I feel, we don't have to have people in parliament. As long as there are people within this country, and especially the youth, I think, finally it's their country, and they are the ones who have to live here for the next 50, 60, 70 years, and all the mistakes we do today, they're the ones who will live through it. So I think, and I'm beginning to feel that there is the new X generations, the Y generations, Z generations, all these new terms are there. They are becoming far more enlightened and far more forward-thinking than before.
But sorry, I need to go back
Yeah.
to, you're talking about Ranil Wickremesinghe. But then you supported Sajith Premadasa at the parliamentary
No,
elections. What about
actually,
him? He's
no.
not good enough?
No, Sajith actually, he was an extremely good minister. In fact, as finance minister, he was one of the few ministers to whom I allocated funds without any fear, because I knew the money will be put to good use efficiently. You see, there's a lot of waste in some of the other ministries. He was an excellent minister, and of course, and he was also the popular face of the party, and that was one of the reasons I really fought for his candidacy at the presidential election, because I really wanted to defeat or at least stop the return of the Rajapaksa regime at any cost, but it didn't succeed.
Isn't that the biggest issue in this country, where people are going for popularity as opposed to capable leaders?
Exactly. I suppose it's not only a problem with this country. Populism is becoming the bane of many a democracy right at the moment. Look at what happened in the United States. Look what's happening in Romania. Look what's happening in Brazil. All these populist leaders are being swept into power without thinking of the consequences that would follow. But in Sri Lanka, perhaps Providence is doing that within 7 months. The people, all those people who voted for the change, are beginning to realize what a dreadful mistake they have made. And I believe that especially after the election, especially after the 5th of August, the true nature of this government, people will be able to see. And that is when I think a very strong movement to protect our the democracy from militarization, and also a very dangerous trend is also taking place, where you have the executive basically completely ignoring the legislature, that is the parliament. In fact, all expenditure, for example, after the 30th of April is totally illegal, because the vote on account only approved up to the 30th of April, and then only Parliament and Parliament alone can approve money. The President can do so only after an election from the first day of Parliament onwards. So this has all been illegal, but unfortunately the judiciary themselves seems to shrug their shoulders and not do much about it. So you have an executive who is actually disregarding Parliament. You have an executive who basically is in many ways disregarding the judiciary. In fact, when there was the controversy about postponing the elections or not, instead of referring that question to the Supreme Court, the President of the Republic actually calls the Sangha Adhikaranya. You know, he goes and asks the Sangha what he should put in. It's a very dangerous trend, because finally the convergence of a executive which ignores Parliament along with the military and the Sangha has brought disastrous results in other parts of the world. I mean,
so you don't believe that with with Moore saying that this is a Sinhalese Buddhist country, that we need to follow?
Countries don't have a religion, countries don't have a race. This is Sri Lanka.
But all our leaders have been saying that.
No, in fact, I've seen with Mahinda Rajapaksa himself said so. And it doesn't matter even if all the leaders said so. The fact of the matter is Sri Lanka is the home to the majority Sinhala Buddhists, of which I am a very proud member. And then we have also the Tamil community who has been here for as long, more or less, as we have. And then the Muslim community who has been here for the last 1,200 years at least. And then, of course, the Burgher, Malay and other communities. And that is what makes Sri Lanka. You see, you don't call Britain a Protestant or Anglican English country. It is the United Kingdom. You don't call India a Hindu Hindi country or whatever. It's called India. So we have to, this is the uncomfortable truths this country has to come to terms with. We are a multiracial, multilingual country, and until we come to terms with that, the development which our country deserves will always elude us. So this, we have to think Sri Lankan, but while thinking Sri Lankan, we have to also be able to celebrate our own respective cultures, our own respective religions. You know, I mean, I am in many ways a devout Buddhist, even though I don't go to every temple I see on the road and take a few cameras and bow in front of it. I do what I have to do as a Buddhist at home. And I'm very proud of my Sinhala, the various, like the Sinhala Alutaurudu, all those things we like to celebrate. But but we must all come out when we must try to think as a Sri Lankan nation. That is the only way forward.
And you have worked with the likes of Mahinda Rajapaksa, Ranil Wickremesinghe, Maithripala Sirisena and so on. Do you have any regrets looking back during your time in office, that there's more that you probably could have done with these leaders, or maybe they just didn't give you the space for you to do that?
No, of course I must say that it was during Chandrika Kumaratunga's administration that I was given the most space, and it was during that period I did the most amount of work for the country, you know, starting from the privatization of telecom to starting the Colombo redevelopment plans, etc. All was the opportunity came during that time. But ever since then, yes, I regret not being able to do more with some of the other leaders, but they were, as I said, the agenda was hijacked by extremists in some of the other cases along the way.
Another area you openly spoke on was LGBT rights. This is a very sensitive issue, and it often took a back seat. Do you think Sri Lanka will ever recognize LGBT rights?
We have to. In fact, I of course feel I haven't spoken enough about LGBT rights, because I mean, perhaps, you know, from the sort of background most of us come from Colombo, LGBT issues were never an issue. It was basically accepted by your families, by your friends, by your teachers, etc.
But that was included in the National Action Plan, wasn't it?
Yes, no, in fact that was included in the National Action Plan because we are still, as far as LGBT guys, especially gay rights are concerned, we are still governed by one of the most archaic laws. It is from the time of Queen Victoria, and then of course Queen Victoria's own country has moved forward away from it, and today we are protecting Queen Victoria's law, saying it is part of the Sinhala Buddhist culture, which I think is an absolute joke. I mean, two consenting adults. The right to love each other is their private business and nothing to do with the state or the government.
And talk us through Sri Lanka's foreign policy. I mean, when you were foreign minister, you all took an independent stand. Now we see a bit of a confrontation taking place with the US and India. Is Sri Lanka's foreign policy on the right track?
It is disastrous. So actually, Sri Lanka is again rapidly hurling towards confrontation and international isolation. In fact, over the years, I mean, especially after in 2015, Sri Lanka opened itself up to the world, and we established excellent relations with all the different power blocks. I mean, we had excellent relations with the United States. The Secretary of State, John Kerry, first visit by such a high officer in 44 years was here. Samantha Power, the UN ambassador, the US ambassador to the UN, was here several times. And in fact, even President Obama, who used to call the good news country at that time, used to call Sri Lanka because in a world full of conflict, Sri Lanka was the country was getting good news about all the reforms and the changes and the democratization. And in his last trip to Asia in 2016 to Vietnam, he finally agreed to come to Colombo, the first ever state visit it would have been by a US president in May of that year. But the day he could actually allocate was the very day we were celebrating Vesak here. So that was, of course, President Sirisena was quite excited. He said, "Oh, no, bring him, we'll go and see the pandals together." But the American president had more things in mind, like a joint address to Parliament, etc. So finally, that was taken off his itinerary. So likewise, with the whole world, we were welcomed with by President Putin in Moscow. China, we had a very close relationship. The EU,
But some say that you all distance yourselves with China.
No, not at all. We didn't distance ourselves, but it was, we didn't want to only deal with China. We want a balanced foreign policy where we would open ourselves to the whole world.
But wasn't there too much interference from the US? I mean, that's
absolutely. Why should the US?
Well, they were at the Human Rights Council.
Because the Human Rights Council is another story. I don't know if you have time enough to talk about it, but what people don't know is that President Rajapaksa himself committed Sri Lanka to an international investigation when Ban Ki-moon arrived here 2 days after the war ended. There was a joint agreement, and then of course, and then subsequently in Geneva, the Sri Lankan government agreed to do certain reconciliation to deal with issues. But as always, they were mere lies to get over the problem for the moment. And finally, the Geneva, it had nothing to do with the US alone, the European Union and the whole of the UNHRC decided, and they not only decided, they initiated an international investigation against Sri Lanka without Sri Lanka's participation. And that report was to have been tabled in Geneva in March of 2015. In fact, had that report been tabled, that final report, it's a damning report. In fact, most probably, after that report was tabled, there would have been further economic sanctions on Sri Lanka. Definitely, there would have been travel bans on President Rajapaksa and other members of his family and other key members of the administration. But luckily for Mahinda and others, and luckily for Sri Lanka, the government changed on the 8th of January. In fact, as foreign minister, after visiting India, the next visit I did was I immediately went to Geneva, and Prince Zaid was the chief there. And we had a long discussion with him and said, we insisted that in this international investigation, which has been done without Sri Lanka's participation, be taken off the book. And we said, now there's a new government, we can actually guarantee the independence of the judiciary now. So please, we will do an investigation to any of the allegations of war crimes and others within Sri Lanka by ourselves. That was a huge victory. And not only did we persuade the UNHRC, then we persuaded the United States of America, we persuaded the United Kingdom, we persuaded countries like Germany to co-sponsor that resolution, which brought back the investigation back into Sri Lankan hands. So this is something which they actually distorted, and because of that very victory, we know the GSP Plus was restored. In fact, when we came in, the fishermen in the south of Sri Lanka, or fishermen of Sri Lanka, could not sell their tuna fish in Europe because there was again a ban on it, and that was restored. And Sri Lanka, as I said, became, we got back to center stage of the international community. And in fact, I still remember, this is a vision which I'll never forget, going to Japan for the G7, where President Sirisena and Sri Lanka was invited to attend at the end of the meeting, to meet all the world leaders who were there. And in fact, I remember going into the room where we were meeting the most powerful leaders of this world who were in Japan at the time. We went a little early before the others came, and Mr. President Sirisena sat on the main table, and I sat on a chair behind him. And then the next minute when they came in, what was amazing was you had people like Obama, Trudeau, Cameron, all the leaders of the world first walk up to Sirisena and shook his hands and went to their seat. So that was because the whole world really rallied around us and wanted to help us. And that was because of our foreign policy.
Thank you, Mr. Samaraweera, for joining us on this program. And that's all the time we have for you for today. Till next time, have a good one.
Thank you.